Welcome to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thank you for joining us. I'm New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, and today I'm joined by Monsignor Kevin Sullivan, Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York, and Stuart Appelbaum, President of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. We're going to discuss the important issues of immigration and migration in the news every day. Recently, the three of us traveled to Central America's Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, a region many families are fleeing in search of asylum at America's southern border. We're going to be discussing some of what we observed, what we learned on that fact-finding mission, and what's driving the migration issue that we hear about in the U.S. Monsignor Sullivan, Stu Appelbaum, thank you for joining me today on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tom.
Monsignor, let me start with you because with Catholic Charities, you're providing very important services to migrants that are arriving here in New York. We had your colleague Mario Russell on a previous show talking about those services. But in many ways, Stu, I think it would be fair to say Monsignor was our inspiration for the trip because of what he was seeing on the front line. So just talk just briefly about what you see every day and what compelled you to invite a very prominent union leader and an elected official to join you.
Elected official.
Not as prominent as the union leader, but we were a good trio. And I should mention, by the way, before you answer that, the three of us also traveled at Stuart's inspiration to Bangladesh in the aftermath of the Rana Plaza collapse. So we have done this kind of fact-finding effort before. But talk about this most recent trip that we took together.
Well, the most recent trip is, sometimes people ask me, well, why did I go? Doesn't Catholic Charities feed people? Don't they, try to make sure they have apartments and counseling? And yes, that's what we do. But key to our mission is not merely dealing with some of the problems that people have, but looking at some of the root causes and trying to figure out if there's ways that maybe some people don't need to have those problems that we can do them. In New York, Catholic Charities is at the center of what New York is about, which is a welcoming place for immigrants, for going back centuries. And so what we have been seeing here for the past year is just a surge of children, primarily from Central America in the past, but now not only children, but also families that are coming. And I'll just tell you one number. Last year, we provided some legal orientation for the unaccompanied children who came to New York, for about 3,000 of them a year ago. This year, we're going to provide to 9,000. So what I said is, hey, something's going on, which we know. Maybe we can get beyond some of the rumors, the sound bites, the rhetoric, the divisiveness to, and I couldn't think of two better colleagues to invite to come to learn about it. So that's what drove it. What we're seeing here in New York drove us to get beyond the border to look at what are the causes of this migration.
Yeah, and I get it, some of the same question, why did you go? Why? Well, we're having to provide services because these families, individuals, children are ending up here in New York. As you said, New York has a tradition of being welcoming to immigrants. So through nonprofits like Catholic Charities, that is an added expense. I don't say it is an expense that you're not willing to take on, but for government as well, because we fund many of the services, help to fund, the New American Hotline that you help to staff with your folks as well. So in fact, there is an impact on this issue, not just at the border, with Texas and Arizona. There's an impact here in New York and a cost as well, which is why we need to figure out a smarter way to deal with it. So Stuart, we took the trip and talk a little bit about, from a union leader perspective, why you thought it was important to be there.
I was really pleased when we decided to go. Many people who migrate to the United States are coming in order to work. They are working in our plants, they're working in our work sites, and they're working with people who have already been here. Last year at one of our facilities in Ohio, ICE came in and raided the facility and rounded up, detained about 145 migrants, mostly from Guatemala. And I thought that it was important for us to understand why is it that people are coming to the United States? Why is it that they want to leave their homes and their families to be here? I thought it was important to understand what was motivating members of our union, and it was also important for others in our union to understand why people were coming here to work with them in their workplaces. So it seemed important for us to go there and to learn what was going on. The sense I have from having been there is we often ask the wrong questions. We ask what is going on at the border with people trying to come to the United States. What we don't ask is, why are people making this extraordinary effort at great risk in order to get to the United States?
Let's share our thoughts. Give us some of your impressions on answering that why. And maybe from I'm sure you had some, we all probably had some preconceived notions on some of the why, but coming back, how do you reflect on the why?
I was really surprised. I was surprised when we were at the trip. I knew all the things in abstraction. I knew about the poverty. I knew about the violence. But being there was much different, to see the extent of the poverty and especially to see the extent of the violence that's going on. We heard a number in Honduras of something like more than 40% of all people in Honduras know somebody who was murdered in the last 2 years. People are trying to stay alive. They're trying to preserve their lives. We heard stories of a grandmother who wasn't able to see her grandchild because he was in the wrong area that was racked by violence by gangs. It was what we saw, I think, went beyond what it was we were able to conceive.
So, Tom, let me pick up on what Stuart said in two ways. So one is the motto that some of the Salvadorian youth have. And it translates into English in the following way. If they're going to kill me at home, I'd prefer I get killed on my going for hope in the United States. I mean, that was just very, very, very kind of poignant to hear that. The other thing is, when we visited the youth center, and at some point we'll talk about the glimmers of hope, but if both of you remember, we're in this van, and they told us we were going down a street in which one of the gangs controlled the neighborhood to our right, and another gang controlled the neighborhood to the left. And here we are in our van, and they said, okay, stop. Put on these vests, which identify you as being with a humanitarian group, and open the windows so the gang spies can look in, and put away your cell phones so they don't think you're recording and taping them. Now, nothing happened to us. We got through it safely, but there was the people on the ground there that gave us those instructions because this isn't kidding. This is real stuff that you experience.
And they pointed to the lookouts along the way that were tracking where we were going.
And they told us to slow down the vehicle so there'd be the opportunity for the lookouts to check inside the car when we came through.
You know, and as Stuart mentioned, I remember when you were talking about it, that grandmother, because she was in an area controlled by one gang, she would have been suspect if she had just traveled, even just to visit her grandchild. So to meet with people and to hear firsthand the testimony of loved ones who were murdered, sexual violence, you know, against women, people knocking on the door saying, "We want your house, and you know, if you don't get out, we're gonna get you out."
Tom, they also said something to people whose houses they wanted. They said, either you can negotiate with us today, or we'll negotiate with your widow tomorrow.
I mean, powerful statements. And relatively speaking, in all countries, governments that were weak, inefficient, corrupt, some combination of all three. Guns in the society, legacy, certainly with Guatemala and El Salvador Civil War, that wasn't all that long ago. And the gangs, what struck me when we heard, I forgot which country we were in, that some of the gang leaders are folks who were deported from the U.S. They grew up here, they learned about MS-13 and 18th Street, those are names from the U.S., right? From Los Angeles neighborhoods. Yeah. And I remember somebody said that some of the leaders actually didn't speak Spanish. They spoke English because they grew up here. And so this notion that it's their problem and the U.S. has no responsibility, I think, it underscores. And even putting aside the challenges if you make it to the U.S., the violence that you might encounter on the way to go through the countries, to go through Mexico and so on. This is not something people want to do. I think many of the people we met would prefer to have stayed in their home countries.
Some people actually try to relocate within their own home country maybe 5 times to get away from the violence before they made the decision that they had to leave. And they knew how risky it was, what they faced, that they might not survive the trip. We were told how mothers would give their daughters birth control pills before they went on the trip in expectation of a good likelihood that they might be raped.
Yeah. So let's touch on a couple other aspects, and let's touch on the glimmer of hope, because we certainly, well, first of all, we were hosted by Catholic Relief Services, so folks that you work with, and we went to some of the wonderful social service providers, often religious affiliated, struggling with all this, trying to help the families. But let's talk a little bit about our own perspectives on what were those glimmers of hope that we saw.
Well, I'll talk about the youth center that we visited, and Tom, I hope you talk about the cafe in the park that you kind of developed a nice rapport with the co-op proprietors of that cafe. But I'll tell you one story. So we walked into this youth center, and I think about 90 youth who are there, who are learning some skills, learning some self-esteem, learning those things which will make them able to survive and thrive, okay? When we walked into the room, and there were sewing machines there, and we walked in, and usually when a group comes in, kids, youth, they get all excited because they, whatever. But I noticed there was one young woman. She looked up for maybe a few seconds, but she kept working on her sewing machine. So I kind of wandered over to her, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She said, "I got to get this right, because if I get this right and I learn how to sew and use this, I can get a job, and I won't have to become part of a gang." So, okay, 90 kids in countries of millions? No. But are there glimmers of hope? And, we've talked about this. When you talk about, like, cutting off some of the aid that is providing the glimmers of hope, you're just going to create more of a crisis on the border. So we saw glimmers of hope, but they got to go up to scale.
What we want to try to do is give people the option to feel they have the option that they can stay in their own country rather than trying to get to the United States.
And have access to the more formal economy. So here in this country, obviously, and you're a well-known national, international champion of labor rights and the importance of unions to protect working people. We met with some of your union counterparts there. What role do you see for labor to be part of the improvement that we'd like to see in those countries moving forward, and some of the challenges that you heard about directly from union leaders?
There again, I think we were struck by the violence that was experienced by people who were involved in their unions. I've been working with the Coca-Cola Workers Union in Guatemala for many years, and the leaders of that union were systematically assassinated. 3 general secretaries, the top position of the union, 3 general secretaries were assassinated. It's employers, sometimes with the assistance of the government, have used have used the gangs in order to impose workplace conditions that they want. But I think that despite all that, people keep standing up, and what unions are trying to do is to create the conditions where people are able to support themselves, to earn decent livings, to be able to remain in the country. And I've been very impressed with the courageousness of the people who get involved. And I think that where unions are able to assert themselves in a reasonable way, you create better conditions and make it possible for people to stay.
We met some very strong union leaders, and some of the women union leaders particularly stand out in my recollection. They're not giving up. And I think to the extent to which we can encourage American corporations that have a presence there, we certainly heard about that, to be responsible and responsive to the men and women who they employ, and to make a commitment in terms of safe working conditions and decent wages. That's what we need to do, provide the opportunities, because the training was wonderful, but if there's not a job there at the other end, that's really one of the challenges. And entrepreneurship, I think that's something else that I took away. You mentioned the cafe with the wonderful young women who were, they had me grinding coffee beans. I didn't do it well, but we had some delicious coffee, and they also had the mugs that were made, and the bracelets and the jewelry made from the coffee beans. So all of the above, that spirit of being willing to, with their own initiative, to have a small business startup and to have that take root. And that's where the aid that we heard about through USAID, the different kinds of programs that are not necessarily brand new, some have been around for a while. But if we would cut back the support, the U.S. support through those kind of programs that are about making solutions, it's only going to make a bad situation worse.
We went to a farm.
Yes.
We went to the farm. We saw what they were trying to do with agriculture. Climate change has also had an impact in the Northern Triangle. And USAID has been helpful there. If we cut it off now, what we do is we make the situation worse for everybody, including for ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because what's happened is that the drought season has become longer. Certain kinds of pests that attack crops are flourishing. There's been a need to change to different farming techniques, more sustainability, and many of these farmers were subsistence to begin with. And that also is driving the migration, there's no question about it. Even with whatever opinions we had beforehand, how do we feel about the notion of building a wall as a solution to stopping the migration from happening, having been there and seeing what's moving people?
A wall, I mean, even if someone supports the wall, they have to recognize that the wall is only dealing with the symptoms of the problem, not the problem itself. What we should be doing is be dealing with the problem of poverty and violence, and that would be much more effective than building a wall.
Tom, I've said this, and I think it's simple to say, is that we need to define what's going on as an American problem. Not a problem of the United States, but an American problem. North America, Central America, and South America. I know enough history to know that in going back to the 1800s, we declared a Monroe Doctrine, where we basically said to Europe, hey, leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, we can take care of our own situation. So what I think we need right now is a 21st century Monroe Doctrine, which is not defensive and reactive, but it's proactive and says, okay, we can take care of problems in our own hemisphere. Okay, what can we do to help in Central America so that people can stay there, have the opportunity to stay there? So I've become an advocate for updating the Monroe Doctrine, where we have a commitment to the Americas, to the United States. And as Stuart said, if we can deal with situations there, we help our own United States. And so that's to me, the solution. I admit, it's not simple. And if anybody wants it to be taken care of by a tweet or by the next election. No, we got to make a commitment which is long-term and not get discouraged when things fail. Okay, it's not going to be perfect, but we got to keep at it, and we can make a difference, and that's what I think I learned from that trip.
I remember one of the bits of advice we got is don't refer to ourselves as Americans,
Right.
because the people there view themselves as
Right.
Americans
Right.
as well. You can say you're from the
Right.
U.S.,
Right.
but it would almost be put that because they're Americans as well. I remember one of the other comments that we heard is that if, let's say, the wall does get built as completely as somebody particular argues for, all that's going to mean is that the smugglers are going to charge more money, and it's going to become more dangerous.
Right.
But people will still find a way, given, as hopefully we captured for our audience, just how severe the dynamic is in so many of these communities. People will still seek to get out.
Yeah.
We have to remember, too, that when someone makes an arrangement with a smuggler, the deal often provides 3 attempts for the same price,
Yeah.
because even if you come to the border and you're turned away, despite how difficult the trip was, you're going to try again and again.
Well,
That's how determined people are.
And what we learned, because I was really pleased with that we saw and talked to a lot of different people. We spoke to government officials, church people, NGOs, unions, farmers. United Nations. But I guess one of the things I had never reflected upon, that we visited 2 migration centers, one in Honduras, one in El Salvador, and in each of them, they got 10 flights back of 300 people on each flight from the United States. So 3,000 each week in each of those countries coming back. And I asked, I said, so do they stay? They said 40% of them are going to turn around and go back. I mean, that's just not a good way for us to be as a society, as a nation, or as a hemisphere.
Even though they were trying to resettle them back, either to where they came from originally, or just, I think Stuart made the point earlier that people have had to move around with it. But many people, they don't have family connections anymore, and they're not safe, and they're afraid the gangs are going to find them, no matter where they go. But the dedication of the folks who work with the migrant, and we met Scalabrini. Am I saying the
Scalabrini?
Scalabrini. I'm sorry, Italian name is tough for me. The Scalabrinis. I mean, were incredible. What devotion! I mean, really, and saving people. But the enormity of the problem is such that they clearly can't do other. And in fairness, perhaps I was somewhat critical earlier on the governments there. We met some government officials, and they are trying, not necessarily as successfully as they could be, but there are some real efforts to try to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed with the government people who were in the migration center that we visited in El Salvador. They were trying to, no, not they were trying, they were treating people with respect. They were trying to assist them. But there is a broader systemic issue that larger governments, and again, I don't hesitate to say that some of the immigration policies of the current administration in Washington, I think, to be nice, are counterproductive. I don't think they move in the right direction. I don't think they accord with what is in the best interest of our country, et cetera. But I do have to say that when one official went down recently to there and talked about providing more aid to help government be better, more security, to help the police there, well, that's a piece of the pie. It's not, but we can't eliminate the fact that there does need to be better government there, in addition to dealing with jobs and dealing with extortion and violence. So it's a multifaceted thing, and we can do it. And we can.
You know, when we opened the show, we talked about the impact of the migration and folks that end up here in New York. So we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to remind everyone, there may be somebody watching that themselves, or they know of someone who may have arrived in New York recently and in need of services and guidance, not just from the Northern Triangle countries, but from any country. So Catholic Charities of New York is a great resource in that regard. We had Mario Russell on not long ago talking about it, but I want to re-mention your the 1-800 number, 1-800-566-7636, 1-800-566-7636. And that's the hotline that New York State helps to fund, and Catholic Charities helps. It's like a joint staffing effort to try to deal with this issue. So if you want to put in a quick plug again for the services that you could provide.
Sure. I mean, and again, in New York State, I think we are very blessed. We're not perfect, but we are a welcoming state. We're a welcoming city. And New York State and New York City have partnered with a lot of nonprofits like Catholic Charities to ensure legal representation, good immigration, safe places for immigrants to be in. Kind of, we're proud to be a partner. And that the hotline you talked about, we answer over 25,000 phone calls a year in providing good information. We couldn't do it without the partnership with New York State. So we're very grateful for that partnership. And basically, what our approach is: if you have a problem, call us. If we don't have the services, we'll figure out where you can get the help.
In the few minutes we have left, I'm interested to have Stuart's perspective on this. You and I attended a mass that Monsignor Sullivan led at the altar in San Salvador, where Archbishop Oscar Romero was assassinated, and now a saint. For me, that was a wonderful moment and gave a sense of inspiration and hope. How did you feel being less formally affiliated with the congregation than myself or Monsignor?
Oldest sister in the faith.
It was very moving to be in the church where he was assassinated, to see this beautiful facility that was really devoted to a higher calling and was really calling on the best of us to deal with the problems in the area. It was a very moving experience. And I also want to remind you about the time we went. We went during the middle of Passover to the Northern Triangle. And what was Passover about? Passover was about one of the largest migrations in history. It was the migration of people who felt that they had no choice at all, despite whatever problems they were going to face along the way, but to flee their homes in Egypt. And I thought that provided context. And we came the day after Easter, which is also represents hope for all of us. And I thought that the timing was extraordinary, and the Mass itself in the church where Saint Oscar Romero was assassinated was very fitting, very appropriate.
Yeah. I don't think, Kevin, you and I could be more eloquent than that. I mean, that really sums it up.
Would you like to come preach it?
There are probably some opportunities available. We're just about out of time, but I want to thank you both, busy schedules, and for you both to be available. It was an important trip for all of us to take as New Yorkers and as citizens of the world, and I think we learned a lot, and hopefully our discussion helps to inform all New Yorkers about this very important issue. So thanks both to Monsignor Sullivan, Stuart Appelbaum.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us. We've run out of time, but I do hope we've provided some thoughtful discussion concerning this very important issue of migration. So again, thanks to Monsignor Sullivan, to Stuart Appelbaum as well. I'm New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.